we expand upon dwarf lore a little more here. Grudges. I have always loved the idea of grudges with dwarves. It is such a classic dwarf idea, and such a, I don't know, to me, a visceral thing with dwarves is the idea of grudges. But combining grudges with the idea of rule of law, and again, rule of law is what is written. So a grudge is, to me, a dwarf grudge is not just like that guy wronged me and I'm mad at him and I want revenge. That's some raise ass shit. A dwarf grudge is essentially there is a hall of grudges. And there is a whole cast of dwarves who are the grudge bearers, and basically they take grudges. They see if, okay, yeah, that's a legitimate grudge, and they hammer that shit in stone. This is a grudge. That is what the grudge bearers are. Essentially, they are actually judges. So when you bring something to the grudge bearers, they judge what this grudge would be, and they judge if it is a valid grudge. But they do not choose side. They're not judges in terms of like this person is right and this person is wrong, because that's not really how dwarven society works, right? You basically bring the grudges to them. They decide if this is a valid grudge in the first place, and then they put it down. And once a grudge is down in dwarven law, that opens up and enacts a bunch of things. If it is a valid grudge, you suddenly are able to bring a lot more stuff up. Again, grudges are also not vengeance. Say you have a grudge against a family, and you assassinate the person that you had a grudge against. That grudge is not diminished. In fact, all you have done is make that worse. The grudge has not been settled. A grudge has now been expanded upon by assassinating that family member that you had a grudge against. The next dwarf can be like, well, now I have a grudge against this person who is an assassin. The height of honor is to settle a grudge, and it does not matter how you settle a grudge. But the height of honor is to actually settle a grudge. It's when you have a grudge with someone and that grudge is settled. But dwarves do not view that as revenge. That is not it. When a grudge is settled, if you were like, this is our grudge and we will have one-on-one combat, and if you die, this grudge is settled on this day, that is fucking honorable, right? You challenge that person, and at the end of that combat, that grudge is settled. You have settled an honorable grudge. You have done well. But being like, I have vengeance against this person, then you like poison his kids and kill his goats, you haven't settled that grudge. In fact, all you've done is grown a grudge. So, as much as putting grudges within the hall is a thing of dwarven culture, almost the bigger thing is settling grudges. And again, this applies mostly to dwarves against dwarves. There is also, of course, a time of settling grudges when it is not dwarves, right? Say an orc clan comes and kills your dwarves and whatever, and you were like, I have a grudge against them. And this grudge will be settled, but I think when it comes to other dwarves, settling grudges is a great thing, but it follows a different set of rules. And the same thing applies, though. So those orcs killed your people, you go in and assassinate them, that grudge is not settled. I feel like when that grudge gets lodged, you say what the end of that grudge is. When you come and you're like, these orcs have killed my people, this grudge will not be settled until every last orc of the name Bloodfang is in the ground. And until you have put every orc of the last name Bloodfang in the ground, that grudge is not settled. But the judges decide, right? Like the judges are like, yes, you have brought a valid grudge, and you have brought your, what you will do to achieve it.
That's interesting because like I didn't know before that the grudge extended beyond dwarf society.
Yeah, and again, this has been my thing with dwarves is the idea of grudge bearers and this idea of how this works. And again, it's hard because you skirt the lines of like Kale who wants justice and Reyes who wants vengeance, blah blah. But like this is culture. This is not gods. And again, there are probably many dwarves of Reyes who fall to their grudges, but like I feel like other dwarves probably don't even look at dwarves that fall to Reyes as like I feel like they lost their way a little bit because it's not about vengeance, it's about settlement. Right? Well, as Reyes is vengeance, it's eye for an eye. Dwarves are like, no, settlement. And that is kind of what really matters.
There's a few actual societies that did similar things in history, where there was someone who like made firm rules for what their grudge was and what it was allowed to go past and what it wasn't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, I love that idea of when you cement this grudge, there is. However, I also feel like it cannot apply to dwarves. I feel like dwarves can settle. Dwarves can almost on their own go together to the Hall of Grudges if they've realized a grudge has been done wrong. or again, and I feel like it probably happens in dwarven culture a lot. Like marriages happen, right? Like you've married into this family, blah blah. Because dwarves by their nature are merchants as well, right? And mercantile shit often is like, okay, I've married my, or not even. Let's not even talk about marriages. Let's talk about trade, right? Because dwarves are about trade. A grudge can be settled by, say, a dwarf coming and being like, we are going to cede our diamond and gem trade in the east to Clan Ruthvik to settle their issues with this. And Clan Ruthvik could be like, we agree, this grudge has been settled. And that is an honorable thing, right? Like, it's not always bloodshed, it's not always whatever. I think within dwarves, grudges can be settled, but outside of dwarven culture, I think there almost has to be a precedent set where they're like, this is the grudge. This is what it will take for this grudge to be resolved, and they put that forward.
Dwarves are like really set in their ways, right? Like dwarves live for a very long time and they're
Yep.
stubborn. If they don't like something, they will tell you.
When a grudge is settled, it is settled. If you have settled a grudge and you carry on that grudge after you've settled it, you were wrong and you were culturally wrong. But when you settle the grudge and the grudge is stricken from the record of grudges, right?
I think it would be cool if the major like grudges, like towns being attacked and stuff,
Yeah.
are going to be written in those things. I feel like families, clans within the clans have grudges outside of the clan, not within like other dwarves. Even though I mean sometimes it happens, but like usually families will also have their own like grudges that they would
Absolutely.
like write down in a book. So I think it would be
Absolutely.
cool as LARPers and like PCs to like have their own grudge
Yeah,
list.
you can have your grudges, but settling those grudges should be what you do. And again,
Yeah.
like to have grudges or whatever is almost this continuous. I always hate this, but to settle something to me is speaks of a certain character of dwarves.
The thing is,
Speaks of a staunchness. Speaks of
yeah.
this grudge has been settled. This is done now. I think dwarves are almost petty in a way too. That where someone is like, is this grudge settled? Most dwarves will find a reason for it not to be. But really, the height of it would be to actually settle a grudge. It's very honorable to settle a grudge, but most dwarves, because of who they are, will find a reason not to settle it. And there's something to be said about, I tried to settle this grudge. They didn't. I did everything that they did. They chose not to settle this grudge. I now lodge a grudge against them. And the Dwarven grudge guys are like, yeah. That's a reason for a grudge. And like hammer that in there, right?
I think we should like write up like 10 like major laws.
Mm-hmm.
That would be really cool.
Yep. Yeah.
I think the idea of pushing away like other dwarves, like to like lock them away or not help other
Yep.
dwarves is like the worst thing possible. Now
Yeah.
it's different if like the dwarf was exiled and he's like, I'm starving. The other dwarves would probably be like, if
So,
they're
so
not exiled dwarves themselves, they would also be like,
we
no.
owe you we owe you nothing because you are exiled. Laws, but almost cultural
Well,
laws. Like you were
yeah,
saying, I think the accusation of kinslaying has to be a very specific thing.
yeah.
Kinslaying almost killing dwarves is not kinslaying. Kinslaying almost has to be this: you have damned dwarves who have not really wronged you.
I was
That
thinking kinslaying would be. It's different when you kill someone from a different clan, but it's worse when you kill someone from your own.
But I think
Yeah.
I think the accusation of kinslaying should actually expand even beyond their own clans, because to me dwarven families are very intertwined, right?
Mhm.
They're familial, but they are also very bred into each other. So
Yeah.
if you trace dwarven lineage back, it's probably only a couple of them that these guys have married these guys and these guys have married these guys. So I think kinslaying becomes this: to kill a dwarf in a grudge duel is not kinslaying. To kill a dwarf in a righteous war, and when I say righteous, is in an approved war, is not kinslaying.
I
But
I
but I,
like that. I love how you're like it's not a righteous war, it's an approved war.
and that's kind of what I'm saying. I think kinslaying has to be almost a very specific law that you have killed a dwarf that you are not approved by law to have killed, and you have now done wrong. And again, that's kind of what we did with the deep dwarves, where they by law had no right to lock them in there. It was the right.
Mm.
It was objectively the right decision. It was all they could do. But by the text of dwarven law, they abandoned their own to die, and that was wrong. And therefore,
Yeah,
they were kinslayers.
I
And
feel like we need to also establish another thing about dwarves and their culture is that when a dwarf gives their word, it is like I live and
Oh,
die to like fulfill this.
I think these two almost overlap, but should be almost in the same idea. Oaths and
Hmm.
grudges. Oaths should be held in the same regard as grudges. So a dwarf who makes an oath, that is an oath. Much like a grudge. When you make a grudge, that is that. I almost want to make another whole religious caste like there's the grudge bearers, but then there should be the oath bearers, and there are different
Yeah.
halls. But the dwarves who hold oaths hold them and hold them in stone. I'm talking almost big picture here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A dwarf's
right,
word
right.
is his word.
Yeah. And again, but culturally, this should be it. Oaths should be held in the same way as grudges. And again, you can make your oath, you can make whatever, but I also think there should be a hall of oaths. But much like there is a hall of grudges, there should be a hall of promises, right?
Mm.
That and again, one might bleed into the other sometimes. Where does like Ruth Vick has promised in our darkest hour he would send his forces, and this is his oath, and that gets hammered. And again, this is more big picture. It's not this is less so the individual dwarf, but I feel like by establishing the culture of what happens here, it bleeds down, right? When you were a dwarf who's like, yeah, whatever, that didn't get hammered in the Hall of Oaths, but I am a dwarf and this is my oath. Much like grudges should be the same resolve. So
Yeah.
and again, I love as much as a dwarf will hate you for ever, will when you wrong them, they will come down on you, and that will be a grudge forever. When you save them and when you do something for them and when they owe you, they will not forget it.
100%. I like that. Dwarves are very like loyal. Like if their king were to say we're going to war, they would go to war. They would not.
Yep.
Not a lot of people question it.
All dwarves who have a family name, upon having a family name, whether you leave your old family or another, what makes a difference between an exile and not an exile, when you make a new family, if you wish to be legitimate, you swear your oath upon the king, and that gets carved into the hall of the king. That is your oath.
Yep.
I like
I
it.
like that. That's good.
Boom, right? Dwarven nobles, when they are granted and they are married and they have other clans, they're basically given the establishments of a home. Or sorry, when they begin to make a new name, they get their hearth, and they are basically, people come and mine out the beginnings of a home, almost like within the mountain, they will carve out the start of a home. And then it is up to the dwarves and their family to establish that more, which becomes these almost labyrinthine, like a dwarven family that has been around forever. If you go into their holds, it is labyrinth upon labyrinth, right? But it started as the dwarven family's one room carved out into the mountain.
But
And as these
because they've
families
lived
go,
there for so
yeah,
long, they just
yeah.
like know where
Yeah,
everything is.
yeah, but they build them out more, right? It's like, and then we've had kids, and those kids have kids, and these cousins have come to live with us, and they mine them out, and they kind of develop these kind of sprawling networks of homes based upon family, though.
Like the opal mine town in Australia. There's an opal mine town in Australia where they're like, growing up here, it's like, you need a new room in your house, Dad will hand you a jackhammer.
Yeah. That actually, that's exactly right.
Okay, so you established the idea that like people go off and make their own hearths, and the idea is that family above all things, right?
Yep.
What determines when it becomes incompatible of what is an outcast and what is just go make your own hearth?
What determines exile? So there's like rules within the groups and like in the grudges, like there are also like these huge set of rules that like a lot of dwarves have to follow. There's just like they're just laws, right? And to dwarves they're normal. One of like the greatest offenses that a lot of people get exiled for is theft. Stealing
Yep.
is the worst thing you could do as a dwarf.
Yep.
You're greedy, very greedy, but to steal from another dwarf is heinous. To kill your own kin is heinous.
If you decide you do not want to be a part of your family's grudges anymore, you want to make your own family and make your own name, you're not exiled. That's fine, but you have now created your own name, you've created your own family, you've created your own lineage. You have essentially let go of all the grudges of before. You have done something else, you have branched out, but you're not exiled. You haven't done anything wrong. You've chosen not to be part of it. This goes a little circular, because I like Dwarven law being a little circular, where your family might have a grudge about you leaving, but by Dwarven law, by you just leaving theirs, I think is totally fine. If you want to go make a separate family, however, I also want to go back into the idea of self-exile. I think the idea of self-exile is absolutely a choice, but I think self-exile for dwarves should be, you are not exiling yourself from family. If you choose self-exile, you are exiling yourself from dwarven culture. If you were a dwarven exile, no one owes you anything. You are no longer protected under dwarven law in any way. If a dwarven exile comes to your doorstep and you crush his head with a hammer, no one cares. There is a difference between establishing another family and doing that thing, but exiling yourself, I think, is choosing to not be part of dwarf culture anymore.
That's an interesting view. I like it. Dwarves are very set in their way, and if a dwarf is like, I don't believe or trust what is happening in this clan, I don't like what's happening in this clan, I want to leave, like, they are more than welcome to just like pack up and go, and that's like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
what happens.
But to me, that's exile. If you're like, I don't
Yeah,
like this family, I don't like the grudges you have, I'm
yeah,
gonna do
yeah.
I'm gonna do my own thing. I think, you know, your family looks at you, they're like, okay, go. You establish your own family, you establish your own name. And I actually love, I'm actually gonna roll off something you said. Names. I love the idea of names.
Yeah.
You choose to leave your family, you were like, this name is no longer mine. And you
Yeah.
make up your own name, which is cool, because dwarves often have silly names like Fohammer or, you know, Grimble. So I feel like dwarves who leave their families make their own names into new families, but I think exile is a very different thing. I have left my family are
Yeah.
two different things. I think many dwarves probably leave their families to be like, I don't care about your grudges. I do not wish to be. And again, there's probably many dwarven youths who are like, I do not wish to be held by your grudges of old. I am going to do something else. And again, even going back to our first event, which was two dwarven clans who had a grudge getting married. I wish I knew this then. I would have presented a third option that let them create their own family.
Yeah.
That would have been awesome. That would have been fine. That
Oh,
would have been
shit, yeah.
valid. Exile means you have either been kicked out or have chosen to leave dwarven culture as a whole. And I think a lot of points you hit on, murder, theft, things that kind of break the laws give you exile from dwarven culture.
Yeah. I think the top 5 of like the 10 laws that we should make are like the ones that cannot be forgiven, because if I think it would be cool if you were exiled and then you found like another group of people who decided to make their own clan. There's like certain rites and rituals and stuff that you can go through and trials to like join them and no longer be exiled. But
Yep,
if you
yep,
have done like
yep.
kinslaying,
Yo, you just hit on a amazing point, actually. An amazing point.
thank you.
And again, I don't know the answer, and this is something we can think about
Mm.
or come up with together right here. An exiled dwarf should be able to join a family. If a family takes in an exile, there should be almost a something, a ritual, a meaning to it. Like an exiled dwarf might be able to join another family, but that family then has to, by taking on an exiled dwarf, bear a certain burden, and I don't know what that would be.
Oh, like they're vouching for them.
Yeah.
All the grudges. They have to take all that man's grudges.
They would have to hold that man's grudges.
Let me spit shit for a minute, and then let's come back to this, because okay, boom, we write up an exiled dwarf can have any grudge lodged against them for any reason. They are no longer bound by the laws of grudges. An exiled dwarf can have any grudge against them lodged, right? So
Yeah.
because you no longer, much like any other race, you no longer fall under dwarven law. You are an exiled dwarf. Anyone can put a grudge upon you. If you wish to take an exiled dwarf into your family, his grudges become your family's grudges, which there is a beauty to this in both ways. You're an exiled dwarf, and now you want to get back. You're going to seek a powerful family that can take your grudges against, say, a family that cannot fulfill those grudges for protection. Or like there is a give and take here that is kind of cool.
I like that. Here's the thing though,
Yeah,
like
sure.
I feel like for a dwarf to be accepted out of exile and like you can't just go up to the wealthiest clan and be like, "Hey, yo, I'm exiled. I'll take your burdens and you could take mine."
Why would they, right? So you're like, I'm an exiled dwarf with all these grudges. I go up to the wealthiest
Okay.
clan that no one can hold these grudges against except me. Why do they accept you? You need to give a reason for them to accept you, which to me is just cool story. Both PC cool story is both storytelling in a cool way. So you're like, I'm a PC, I'm an exiled dwarf. You suddenly come upon a vein of mithril ore or whatever this blah blah. You then turn around to a family and say you're a PC dwarf. You turn around to a big dwarven family. Say we take our game and you're like,
Oh,
I'm an exiled dwarf. You turn around to Humblebrag and you're like, I will give you this. You bring me in and I am no longer an exiled dwarf. That's such
and
a
like
cool goal.
I'll work this
That-
mine for you.
yeah, and they're like, yep.
That I like.
They're like, yep, we'll take your grudges because it's such a cool PC goal and it gives you something to
Yeah.
work forward to, right? If you go out and you're like, if you're like, I'm gonna be a PC who's an exiled dwarf, you cast aside all of your dwarven shit that's it's somewhat disadvantageous, but it gives you something so cool to work forward to. Again, why would they accept you? They're under no obligation to accept exiled dwarves, but by accepting an exiled dwarf, they take their grudges on. But why would you take someone's grudges on if you did not have something to gain more than the grudges that they held? That's how dwarves think, right?
We have more to gain as a collective. It makes us richer because
What makes a difference between an exile and not an exile, when you make a new family, if you wish to be legitimate, you swear your oath upon the king, and that gets carved into the hall of the king. That is
Yeah.
your oath.
Yep,
I like
I
it.
like that. That's good.
Boom, right? I think Gurdain, it should not be a democracy. Dwarves do not strike me as democratic. Dwarves come down to culture. So if there is a cultural leader, they swear the oath to their cultural leader, and their cultural leader probably swears an oath to uphold their culture.
A lot of dwarves, like their job is to like remind the king what decisions they're making for and who they're making for. So
Yeah,
he
yeah.
listens to everybody, but he like after everybody has spoken, that is when usually the king or queen
Yeah,
goes,
whatever.
"This is what we're doing."
There was no part of me that wants to establish dwarves as a male craddock. Like sorry, I don't know the term for it. Yeah,
I think it would be
and
cool if we had like one of the major dwarf clans run by a queen.
the thing about dwarves and kings and shit like that, I don't know how to word this delicately. I am not someone who cares about the sensitivity about.
We have other people who can do that though. Like that doesn't need to be your job.
Yeah, exactly. They can do that. However, I can also see some things as they are. And dwarves, there is no part of me, no ounce in my bones that believes dwarf men and women should be different. Because almost all of dwarven lore, and
No,
almost
no, they're very
in
equal.
yeah, exactly. Almost all of dwarven lore and almost all of respects, dwarf men and women. It's like a joke in some lores. It's like you can barely tell them apart. So cool, you can barely tell them apart. Therefore, don't treat them differently. To me, that is just the first step of logic. So I think when it comes to dwarf kings and queens and titles, it has nothing to do with gender. Has everything to do with family. I don't like queens being named kings. They're queens in their own regard. Quite frankly, for dwarves, I think we come up with another name.
Thane, like wouldn't that's whole
Yeah,
dwarf lore, right?
so Thane is lesser. I've already kind of done that in terms of Ruthvik is a Thane of Humblebrag.
You guys also have like this really good opportunity just to make either a whole new word or just to make it a title instead.
Magnate is cool too, because it comes back to the trade thing.
Yeah. Dwarves are generally German. But again, here is Underworld's. I don't know the word for it. I'm sure there is a word that explains this, and I don't know how to explain it. But the problem with Underworld is Underworld has assigned languages to cultures, but always said these cultures are not these languages, but our stupid monkey brains. I'm not putting this on anyone because we all do the same. When you assign a language to a culture, you then assign the culture of that language to the culture, which is actually fucking wrong. Best example is Hoblings are Japanese, and someone's like, "I'm a Hobling and a Komodo." You're like, you missed the point.
Cultures to what we know, right? Like in every fantasy, like there's a stuff that we know in the real
Right?
world,
Yeah.
physics and shit like that. We
Yeah.
associate those
And
things to the cultures we know, right? Like
and
you
and
won't.
again, I love the idea. I love the idea of again, what we're doing in LARP is different. And again, we can't just make up languages. I love the idea of we assign language to cultures, and if you speak it, you just know that language. That's a cool throwaway, but I think we get lost in equating that to the culture.
So So what happens when like a line dies or something? Do they like just give it to someone else, or does it like become like a?
So, from what I understand, is that if let's say, two dwarves get married, and there isn't room for them, or the house, or the hold, or whatever, cannot expand any further, for structural issues or for whatever other reason, they will just make a new place for them.
Yep.
If a house or a lineage would die and the place would be vacant, they would basically just clean it up. And when somebody else gets married, and if they want a new area to live in, they can put them in there.
In terms of marriage, so symbols of engagement are crafted by dwarves looking to earn favor from the high chief. Like it is not like, oh, this is our wedding ring. Like multiple dwarves will craft these symbols of engagement, and then basically one for both the bride and the groom. So say you're a family looking to earn favor that is below the nobler family. You craft your bride and groom thing. These symbols are then presented the bride and groom separately, where they choose which they will present to the other. If both choose the same set, that is the highest fucking honor.
Are they going to have any religious denomination dragons
Nope.
think you're going to focus on? Or are they going to have like
Nope.
pillars, or
Nope.
not at all?
Dwarves are not religious.
Nice.
They do not follow religion. Not that they do not follow them, but your family comes before whatever you follow. So which complicates things greatly. So if you were like, I'm a dwarf who follows Rays and I have to take vengeance against my cousin, and you kill your cousin, you have been exiled from dwarven culture because you have chosen religion over culture. Dwarves are culture before religion. Always, always, always. So they're not pigeonholed. It's not like dwarves believe in this, or dwarves love dragons, or dwarves love this god, or dwarves love that god. But to dwarves, they are, if what you have chosen goes against our culture, you are wrong.
From what I understand of dwarves, is that their mindset is very over the group rather than the individual.
Yes.
A dwarf typically who is thinking about himself is more thinking about, how can I be a better person for the group? And
Like dwarves, I think anyone who knows fantasy enough is like, dwarves are often associated with greed. I want to like spin that on its head a little bit, where yes, they are, but that greed is not personal greed. Say a dwarf is like, I want to take all these magic weapons. That dwarf does not want all those magic weapons for himself. That dwarf is not going to take those magic weapons and keep them for himself. He's going to take those and give them to his people and his clan and further his family. Magnora is the classic, but I am also of the opinion I do not want to pigeonhole dwarves into dwarves follow Magnora. Magnora happens to be the god that aligns with their beliefs the most.
yeah, like if they were to choose to follow a god, it would definitely be someone who is more neutral. Crafting for the group aligns with a lot of dwarves, and a lot of dwarves are crafters.
Absolutely, which again
Yeah,
is very much in dwarven methodology and ideology
Yeah.
but I'm of the opinion, and again, this
Yeah.
don't take my word as shit, because nothing has been written about
No,
dwarves,
no,
so
of
I
course.
might say all this and this might all change, but I am of the opinion that despite the fact that there are definitely certain gods they obviously skew more to, but I think by saying dwarves care more about culture and the family and the group
Mm.
than any other god, that by saying that actually already limits certain gods. Dwarves follow gods that follow this ideology. And again, Magnora, quite frankly, yes, is probably the most prevalent among dwarves, but I am loath to say dwarves follow this and this is what they do, because I think you could probably have a family of dwarves where
Mm.
a lot of you follow Magnora, and then you have a son who's like, I like the dragon of this. Not to downplay dragons, but I think Vesemir is almost an easier thing within family, because Vesemir is a great example, honestly, is that you're from a dwarven family, and most, anyone who really follow, but again, they don't have to follow gods, because I think for the most part, dwarves do not throw themselves into gods. Many of them
No.
do. Many of them do, and they can. And there's nothing saying they cannot, but their culture does not throw themselves into
I
gods.
feel like it would be I feel like it might also be more right to say those dwarves who are crafters would be more inclined to do so, but the rest of society doesn't.
But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, you were a dwarven crafter who joins the dwarven crafting guild that is probably led by a leader of Magnora, who follows Magnora. So those who are in the highest power and achieve the pinnacle of, say, whatever Magnora's thing is, which is, building and perfection. And honestly, one of my favorite things about Magnora, which is actually a little bit unexplored in her lore, but I think is so good for dwarves, is Magnora, if you look at it, actually promotes cultural growth as well. Magnora is not just about making something. It is about crafting anything. So crafting a society that works together is within Magnora's purview. So I think dwarven administrators, and again, I actually agree with you. I think most dwarves probably do follow Magnora, and I think if a wiki gets written, despite my I am very kind of on the side of, like, I don't like races being pigeonholed into gods, but I do think if a wiki gets written, it will probably say most dwarves follow this, even though I would not want to say that. Vesemir is also actually a very valid fucking god for dwarves. Vesemir, a god of life and death and passing, blah blah.
Yeah.
But I also feel like dwarves do not get into the draconic divine thing. Dwarves can follow whatever gods they want as long as it benefits society. By saying that, it limits it a little bit too, because there are some gods that you will follow, understanding that your family might follow dragons, that these things cannot be compatible, and you must be compatible with your family before anything else. Most dwarves are probably follow the divine for the most part. However, if a dwarf in your family does not follow the divine, that does not then lead to exile.
Leaning to exile would be following like a dark god.
Exactly. Or honestly, there are some dark gods that I think are acceptable. I think Rays following dwarves, you can sell me on that, right? Rays following dwarves are an acceptable thing. But I think the catch with the dwarves, and I think what it comes down to, and again, what we were talking about is culture before everything. Family is everything. So look, you guys go to your family dinners, you do whatever. You might have family from different walks of life, blah blah. Some of your family might believe in shit that you're like, oh yeah, there's my crazy Trump following uncle, or whatever shit goes down at your family dinners that you're like, yeah, there's Uncle so and so. But at the end of the day, they have dinner together, they respect each other. But if you follow something that by its tenets declares that you do not respect family, quite frankly, no accepted dwarves follow Maligan. But I do think that despite them being mostly divine, that they can get together at a family dinner and have dwarves who follow dragons, that they aren't pulling knives and stabbing each other over. I think there is just a singular title of ruler. Whether you are male or female, who is the best, who benefits the family? They're not looking like, hey, who benefits the family? Oh, is he a male? No, that's just not how dwarves think. They're like, who is the best choice? Whether it is male or female is fucking irrelevant.
What's a leader to a dwarf? Like, do you understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
doesn't, like, no gender wise, like,
For someone new to become a leader, like, let's say some dwarf who decided to leave their home is like, I'm gonna make my own home. He's automatically in charge. So dwarves who are kings or queens are just like generations long of like royal blood.
Think if you make your family and you were noble, you no longer retain a single amount of noble title. I think
as
only
a character, like, player.
I think only families who continue maintain noble title.
It's a really cool aspect because then it's a matter of like also the grudges, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're bearing that weight.
Yeah, and again, it also creates an issue of say you're a dwarf who's like, I don't really like my family's thing. I'm going to create my own family. That would be easy, but by doing so, you now become nothing. Like life is carved in stone. There is a rule in Underworld that any of you new players, if you might not have seen this, when you make a character background, there is a caveat: you cannot be a noble. So you can be a dwarf who's from a family that was a noble family that left, and now you're nobodies. And that's awesome. That's your story. That's amazing.
All the nobles are based off the idea of an oath they made and something that they're bringing to the dwarf society. So, like, kind of like bearing like the grudges and other things, you're also bearing an oath of something that you have promised to do.
I actually think there's probably the King's Hall of Oaths, where all families who are part of dwarven society that don't want to be exiled put their oaths to the king. And the ones that have succeeded are the ones that have these big halls and sprawling families. Instead of noble, I am a first oath family. I really like the idea of first oaths. What I propose, and this is just a speculation, should there be a set number of first oaths or nobles? Without saying nobles, you're like, this is a first oath family. However, first oaths implies there is a set number of first oaths. So, is it a good idea to set a number of first oath families? Say there were 10 first oath families. Do you have to depose one to become another? And again, you might not have actually been a family that made a first oath, but you might be able to take their oaths.
There should not be a set amount of first oaths, because like if one family overthrows like three other first oath families, then you're three down. Like and like what do? You set it like you just put up like three families that are your puppets kind of thing, and like
Ooh, you've hit on something interesting, Max. Say we have 10 first oath families, and one of them is shit, and they let their family go to shit. And most of their family diminishes and leaves them and makes sub-families, and they actually now hold no power. Another family comes, conquers them, and by their grudge is like, your daughter will marry my son. By the settlement of this grudge, your daughter will marry my son. But I like the idea of almost stealing through politics and through maybe money, right?
Does your character have like a last name?
No.
So a thing that I think personally is really cool, and the thing that me and Willis did is that for ourselves, we were kicked out. And if you're kicked out, you lose your last name. And that's what I think of whenever you're outside. Like if you're in a town or if you visit a big city and you see other dwarves, they are so family connected that they will like form their own like guild, like home holds or like
Okay.
clans if you're kicked out, and that's how just more get colonized, like colonies of dwarves become like their own central people, or like when there's randomly people like a bunch of dwarves in this one house, because and a lot of the lore that I read, dwarves, like their families, like literally their generations just live in the same house
Yeah.
forever,
Yep.
like
Yep.
generations of generations, and I think
So
that's really cool.
and I actually love. I'm actually gonna
Mhm.
roll off something you said. Names. I love the idea of names. You
Yeah.
you choose to leave your family. You were like, this name is no longer mine, and you
Yeah.
you make up your own name, which is cool because dwarves often have silly names like Fohammer or Grimble. So I feel like dwarves who leave their families make their own names into new families, but I think exile is a very different thing. I like the idea that there is a way for another family to
to
take that
rise. Yeah, I
that
mean,
from them. But I also like making it a little bit convoluted because I like this about dwarves. I feel like dwarves are a little convoluted, but you take them through law. And again, I think if we establish a law of how to take a family name, when you're in exile, you give up a name. Maybe names are everything. So maybe your family takes a name, and maybe they take the old name of the first oath takers. Again, I think that's cool lore, right? It's like say there were 10 families, and the family of fucking you know hammer smashers fell to shit, and the family of gembringers comes up and they beat them, and at the end the family of gembringers takes upon the family name hammer smasher, and again maybe this dilutes it a little bit, but I like the idea that they can steal nobility from each other.
how you take over
Yeah.
power and how you show your
When I first heard the first oath families, I was thinking there was like some point where the dwarves were all like really really low, and they like just hear me out. Like they fought like
Yeah.
a huge war, and now their people are like very small and they need to rebuild. This is like generations back, and the first oath is like the oath of the first king that was
yeah.
passed down through generations,
Yeah, and we
and
lost.
all the other homes would take up that mantle and take that first oath. And what that first oath is literally just like them saying that like I will protect all the people under me, blah 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 blah.
I think you just hit it. It's not the family name, it is the oath itself, not the name. Yeah, boom,
You
boom,
could
boom. Yeah,
take
yeah,
the
yeah.
name too,
You don't need
through
to.
those ways, but like if you were to leave and like bring like let's say like you and like 5 other small clans within this giant clan decide to leave, right? And go start off
And
your
then
own thing.
converge
One person would take
First Oath families, but the families are not actually literally the families that took the First Oath. There might be families that have died off, and then you take the First Oath, and the First Oath is very specific. It is not something anyone can take. You earn the place of First Oath. The king takes upon the grudges of the First Oath family, much like we do exiles.
May I feel like the first oath is more like like the Declaration of Independence and such, like how they are the
So a First Oath family that comes to you that wishes to swear the First Oath, you can give it to them, but you take all their grudges. So not any family can just do it. The king has to choose to literally choose. Be like, yeah, your family is worthy. I will give you the First Oath. You bear this. Mike said here, I like the idea that oath families have not been claimed. That is such cool lore. And again, if we're writing a wiki, or say there were 10, but only 7 of the First Oath families have been claimed. The other oaths are not claimed. Because again, you give someone something to strive for, man. Like what is such a cool PC dwarf concept where you're like, I will be an oath family and I will make it happen or whatever, right?
I wanted to ask, so there's
sure.
that stereotypical trope of dwarves and elves not getting along.
For our local dwarves, Humblebrag is actually a little different than most dwarven nations, whereas Humblebrag does not care about ethnicity. Humblebrag is actually a more or less trading area. Humblebrag is my means to get interesting characters into the game. So Humblebrag consists of actually a lot of diverse races. Humblebrag is the first protocol for anyone who shows up in Yormonger. So the dwarves in Humblebrag particularly are not fussy as long as everyone follows their laws and does their shit and doesn't f them around, right? That being said, in terms of Gridanian general lore, I would argue dwarves and elves have no reason to hate each other in terms of our world's history. Humans and elves do. I am very much against pigeonholing players into ideas. What actually is honestly the answer for the most part is I don't care.
Thank you for listening to the Mournfall Lore podcast with GM Kieran. Contributors to this episode were Digger, Tori, Max, and myself, Sarah. We would love to continue doing these, so please like and subscribe, comment below to tell us what you think, and suggest what we should talk about next. Hopefully we'll see you in another episode.